Hello, friends. Oh. Where are my readers? There's somebody. Let's see who it is. There's that Reagan girl. I'm so glad I got to see you today. That was so much fun. Hey, Magdalene. I'm glad I got to see you too. Just for a little bit. Let's give a few more people a chance to get in here. Hello, friends. It's our last chance to read together this week, and then we'll have the weekend break. And I'll come back with you on Monday again. I know this has become a nice little routine for a few families. And for me too. Hey, Sophia. I see you. Yes, we had, every time I clicked the live video, it would boot me out of Facebook altogether. So you had them too, huh? Hey, Alex. How are you, buddy? I kind of feel like the whole internet system must be having problems. I guess because everybody's trying to social media while they social distance. Have some great stories for you. A couple of my favorites. In one of these stories we always read at the end of the year, and I always save it, but you know what? I was like, I'm going to pull it out and read it today because I love it that much. It's by author David Shannon, who is the author of all the No David books that we love so much. Hey, Reagan. So I had to get that one for you. I think I'm going to save that one for last because it's my fave. And then Monday I'll give you guys a poll so you can choose. And I should be able to go into my classroom, or should I say our classroom, for just a few hours on Tuesday. Yes, I know you love No Davids. And I can grab, I had just taken a whole big bag of books in to read to you guys, and they got stuck there. So I want to grab that bag while I'm there so that I'll have more stories to read with you. So I'm going to save that second story I was talking about by David Shannon, and I'm going to start with the one you've probably heard before. Hey, Shelly kiddos. I'm glad you're here. Moosetache. Has anyone read this book? I love it. It's so funny. Moosetache by Margie Palatini. Illustrated by Henry Cole. Here's the title page. Ah! Oh no. Look at that. Moose had a horrible problem. A horrible, hairy, prickly problem. It grew right below his nostrils and just above his upper lip. A moosetache. Ah! I'm glad you like this. This reminds me of my husband. My husband does No Shave November every November and grows this big old mustache. And I hate it. Now, not a few spare hairs or a shy little stubble. No mere weak wandering whispers. No siree. Moose had a big, bushy, bristly, mighty Moosetache. But a Moosetache that was burly, surly, mangy mess. And it itched a lot. Sure, he plucked and tweezed, he even clipped and snipped and teased, but his combs were still cowards, and his brushes rebelled, and his scissors simply surrendered. So all of his tools could not handle his Moosetache. It was too thick and too crazy. Moose was in a frizzy tizzy. The Moosetache was completely crimping his style. He was a great hoofer, but he could barely bop and hip-hop with a Moosetache going flip-flop. So he liked to dance, but that Moosetache kept getting in the way, tripping him up. You can see he's got his little headphones. He was a wonderful chef, but simply could not flambe his souffle with all those whiskers in the way. And he was a daring skier, but how could he downhill race with the mighty Moosetache blowing in his face? Moose had to do something, and soon. But what? There he is trying to ski. He's trying to be a chef, but ew. His Moosetache is getting in his souffle. Oh, I'm glad you love it. Is that my Kaylin on here? Oh, I hope so. I miss you. After days and days of much serious thought, Moose got an idea. He crossed some hair here, he crossed some hair there, and he tied his Moosetache around his neck. A moose scarf seemed to be the ideal answer to his problem. It was so simple, so easy, so perfect. So now he's giving himself a moose scarf with all that hair. Ew. I still think that would be very itchy. Yikes. But then his Moosetache got knotted and mangled and horribly tangled, and those hundreds of hairs still prickled and tickled. Worse, Moose could barely take a breath with all that Moosetache wrapped around his neck. So Moose untied and unwrapped and unknotted and gulped in some fresh air. Oh gosh. Sorry about the squeaky chair. He got another idea. He parted some hair this way, he parted some hair that way, and he heaped all that Moosetache on top of his head. Reminds me of mine. Moustachioed antlers seemed to be the ideal answer to his problem. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect. Until a squadron of squirrels and one very nosy gopher moved right into the Moose Motel. They huddled and hoarded, furrowed in and burrowed out. Needless to say, it became quite crowded up there on Moose's head, and heavy and messy. So he piled his Moosetache on top, and all these little critters started moving in. Oh no. Yikes. And very, very noisy. All that squirrely chitting and chatting, squeals and squawks, woke Moose up every morning before the crack of dawn. And that gopher was giving the Moose one hairy headache. Moose needed his sleep. He needed his rest, and he needed his privacy. Moustachioed antlers? No, that's just nuts, said Moose. So he unparted, unpiled, untwisted, untwined, and said adios to those hairy horns. They're even up there when he's taking a bath. But now what? What? The miserable moose took hold of a hunk of hair and he wrestled it and then roped it. He tethered and tied and tamed and aha! A moose tail. Now that was so simple. That was easy. That was so perfectly perfect. Talk about a dizzy do. Moose didn't know if he was coming or going, backward or forward, this way or that. He didn't know which end was which. Moose had to bail on the tail. So there he is. He wrapped it all in a tail. But he couldn't see where he was going. Oh my goodness. And so he thought and thought and thought some more, but no other idea was a worthy winner. Braids were a bother. A moustache sweater? Too sweltering, which means really hot. A net? Not. Poor Moose. His problem was truly terrible, unbearable, and just downright sad. He felt so alone. He didn't know what else to do. So there he is trying braids, but that got in the way. Here he is trying to make a sweater. Too hot. And he tried to hold it in a net. Nothing worked. Then call it fate. Call it destiny. But one day Moose tripped on his moustache, and he had no time to duck. Oof! Pardon me, they both said as they both bumped. They blinked, and they stared, and their hearts went thump-a-thump. She was a moose, with a bouffant so bodacious, outrageous. Well, it was just plain old big. Hair after hair piled higher than high, a skyscraping dew of glorious curls, a tower of swirling twists and twirls. She was simply splendid, absolutely superb. So he's talking about this hairstyle she has, a bouffant. He ran right into her when he tripped. Of course, Moose had to ask how she did it. Mrs. Moose winked and then whispered, "Just a little glue." So she helped, and he fearlessly plunged a hoof into a fat pot of the white gooey goop, and carefully, oh so carefully, they glopped and they plopped, they pasted and they pressed, they coaxed and they curled every unruly whisker. Around and around they tweaked and twirled those horrible hairs until Moose's once mangy mess was now a wondrous, winding wave of a marvelous moustache. Moose gazed in the mirror and smiled, a broad, moosey smile. He was so happy, so glad, just giddy with glee. He looked dashing and handsome. Moose gushed, "Is that really me?" There they are putting the glue on all his whiskers. That would be hard to get out. With not a care for one hair, the moose pair boogied and bopped, and their cooking was hot, hot, hot. So there they are dancing together. Look at his twirly mustache now. They're skiing. So, of course, it wasn't long after that Moose and his moustache and his beautiful bride fox-trotted and tangoed and waltzed down the aisle. Good hair days, bad hair days, they vowed to love and to cherish. And with hearts heaped with love and pots filled with goop, they both sighed, "I do, glue," and promised to never part. The end. So he found his perfect mate. Oh, it was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect, and it stuck. And then it shows pictures of them when they have babies. Later on in their life. The end. That was cute. I liked that. Okay, and my other favorite, it is another longer one like Moosetache, but it's worth it. This one is called Jangles, A Big Fish Story. A big fish story is like a story that almost sounds like it almost isn't real because it's so wild. That's a big fish story. Here's the title page. You can see it says Jangles. I know it's a little backwards though. But notice how the illustrations look very similar to No David characters. That's because he's the author of this book too. Excuse me. When the sun goes down and the weather's just right, Big Lake gets smooth as glass and a thin mist whispers across it. That's when you might catch a glimpse of Jangles. My father told me lots of stories, but my favorite was about a giant trout he saw when he was a kid. I still remember sitting with him in front of the big stone fireplace at the cabin. He pulled out a dirty green tackle box and shook it a couple times so it rattled. And he told me this story. So what you're about to hear is the story that the father would tell the boy in this story. So this is like a tale that his dad told him. When I was a kid, Jangles was the biggest fish anyone had ever seen or heard. That's right, you could hear Jangles. He'd broken so many fishing lines that his huge crooked jaw was covered with shiny metal lures and rusty old fish hooks of all shapes and sizes. They clinked and clattered as he swam. That's why he was called Jangles. And there's a picture of him. See all those old fishing hooks? All those hooks never caught him though. He just broke them right away. Now remember, this is the dad telling this story though, so that's why he says, when I was a kid. He's talking about going fishing like as a younger child, but he's grown up now. Jangles was so big, he ate eagles from trees that hung over the lake and full-grown beavers that strayed too far from home. Holy moly, you can see all the feathers flying. And there's his tail. But he didn't seem to care for the taste of kids. In fact, people swear that one time Jangles saved a baby who fell in the lake when his family's canoe tipped over. They say he took that baby up so gently that none of the hooks even stuck it, and he swam it to shore. Supposedly, he gave the baby's mama a dirty look, as if to say, "What are you doing bringing your precious little baby out here in a tippy old canoe?" Oh, there he is saving the baby. Little fat baby. Everyone wanted to catch Jangles. They held big tournaments with lots of prize money, but no one could bring him in. He was too smart, too strong, and he lived too down deep in the middle of the lake. They tried all sorts of tricks, like using whole turkeys for bait. So there they are all trying to catch him. And he's using a whole big turkey. That's crazy. I'm gonna spill my drink. I'm so excited about this story. One fellow even tried dynamite. He threw big cans of tuna fish in the water and waited until he heard Jangles coming. Then he lit a stick of dynamite and tossed it into the lake. I don't know if it hit a rock or something, but that dynamite came flying back out of the water and into his boat and blew it to smithereens. Then he had to swim all the way back to his dock. He said Jangles came up and bumped him on his butt, but nobody believed him. I guess that's what he gets for trying to use dynamite. One time, when I was just about your age, remember this is the dad talking, I was fishing over where the creek comes into the lake, and my anchor came loose. I was concentrating so hard on catching a fish that I didn't notice I was drifting way out into the middle of the lake. There wasn't another soul out there, and it was getting dark. Hey, Miss Palmer. I'm reading one of my favorites that I said we usually save to the end of the year, but I just couldn't wait. I had to read it. It was sitting over here on my library shelf, and I kept looking at it. I think they're liking it so far. Just when I realized where I was, I felt a tug on my line. Not a real big tug, but something was on the other end. I started to reel it in. It was wiggling all right, but it didn't really feel like a fish. I finally got it in, and what do you know? I had snagged an old fishing rod that somebody must have dropped out of a boat a long time ago. So he hooked an old rod when he was fishing. Remember, he was drifting out into the middle of the lake. Remember where Jangles lives? I started to reel that fishing pole in too. I cranked, and finally I felt the end of it getting closer to the surface. Then I heard a sound that made my whole body feel prickly. It was kind of soft at first. Twinkle, tangle, dingle. But then it started getting louder. Tingle, jingle, jangle. Now I used to daydream all the time about catching Jangles, but right then I was scared to death. Just when I saw the lure on the end of the line, a gigantic shadow came out of the deep darkness and swallowed it up. There's the shadow. Might be Jangles, huh? Hey, I hope that's Juanita and Xander. I'm so glad you could join. My rod bent nearly in half, and I was hanging onto it like it was my first dollar, when Jangles suddenly swam under the boat and pulled me right over the side and into the cold, black lake. Down we went like a crazy horse and buggy. Pretty soon I noticed that I could still breathe, and the water wasn't cold anymore. So he's pulling him down, down, down. Finally, we came to a cave in the deepest part of the lake. It was decorated with old parts of old boats and lots of rods and reels. "This is my home," said Jangles. "It's been a long time since I had a visitor." His voice was low and soothing, and it seemed perfectly natural that a fish was talking. So I wasn't afraid at all. So he's got him in his home with all those old boats. You can see all the lures in his mouth. Excuse me. Then Jangles told me stories. Amazing, wonderful stories about the beginning of the earth, before there were people, and stories about wise old redwood trees and animals who were silly, and the great fish that lived before him in the big lake. It was like Jangles was my magical uncle. After a while, I started to get sleepy, and he said, "Time to go." So he's telling him stories of long ago, when the earth was just new. Oh, I'm so glad you love this book. I had to read it. It's one of my favorites. I couldn't wait till the end of the year. It was staring at me, saying, "Read me." He told me to hang on to the big fin on his back and I still had the old rod in my hand. And as we swam up and the water turned from black to purple, I slowly pulled out some line and I made a bunch of big loops. When we reached the surface, Jangles swam alongside my boat. Quick as a minnow, I hopped off the fish's giant back and threw the coils of line around him. Then with a sharp yank, I spun him upside down. Now you might not know this, but when you turn a fish upside down, even a big old smart fish like Jangles, it gets confused and it can't hardly move, almost like it's paralyzed. Hey Leah, we're reading Jangles. I can't remember if I read this story with your group or not. I started to read it every year. Gotcha! I shouted. Jangles just lay there, but he could still talk. You tricked me, he cried. I told you secrets about the beginning of time, and this is how you thank me? You're a fish, I said, and I have caught you. Set me free, Jangles urged. I'm more than a fish. I'm a storyteller, and I'm a story myself. A story that no one will believe if I let you go, I replied. Remember, this is still the dad talking. Then Jangles asked me, is that more important than doing what's right? So he's got them all tied up there, and he said he's going to keep them so that he can show everybody that he's the one who caught Jangles. But he said, is that more important than doing what's right? Proving that he was the person who caught him. I thought of all the wondrous things that I'd heard that day, and then I thought about the people dragging whole turkeys around the lake. You're right, I said. I'm sorry. I'll set you free. But what can I do to apologize? I swear Jangles grinned at me with that big, crooked, jingly jaw of his. There's one thing you can do to help me, he said. And it would also prove that you caught old Jangles. What would prove that he caught Jangles and also be a way for him to say he's sorry? That's when my dad stopped telling his story and gave me his tackle box. It was full to the top with shiny metal lures and rusty old fish hooks of all shapes and sizes. He never told anyone about catching the giant fish. He kept it a secret until that night when he told me. And now I'm telling you. So here's his tackle box. So what did he do for Jangles that still proved that he had caught him? That's the best part, I think. And remember at the beginning he said he shook the tackle box and you could hear it jingle, jangle, jingle, jangle. And then at the end, they don't tell you that those are all the hooks that were in his mouth, but they show you the tackle box filled with all the lures and all the hooks. So maybe the dad took those out of Jangles' mouth. I'm glad you like that, Shelly Kids. It's a fun surprise ending that I truly, truly love. Let me check the time. It is already 7:31, and those stories were a little bit longer, so I'm a little parched now. So I think I'm going to call it a night with those two. I know some of you are just now logging on. If you missed the story, I will post the replay because I don't want you to miss these great books. And I will also post a link for my YouTube page. Yes, Miss Palmer, you have to infer that those are the same hooks, which means use the clues. But the author doesn't exactly tell you. So that's why I love this book so much. I love when the author gives you a chance to use the clues and think for yourself, because it makes it so much more fun. Okay, you can head on over to Miss Palmer's first grade class, her Facebook page. I think she wanted you to vote in her poll real quick if you could, because I think she's trying to tie break between 2 books that she's going to read. I voted earlier. I know which one I want to hear. And let me tell you what her choices were. One was Piggy Pie. Another was, I think it was between 2 other Twisted Fairy Tales. I'm not sure which ones. But if you know me, you probably know which one I voted for. Because Piggy Pie was a choice. So I voted for that one. Alright, head on over there and listen to, I hope, Piggy Pie, fingers crossed. And I will see you again on Monday at 7 o'clock. Have a great weekend. Try to get outside. The weather was beautiful today. I hope you were out riding your bike or taking a walk or walking your doggos. If you're going to bed, have sweet dreams. I miss you. Make sure to check your dojo messages if you're one of my parents, because I sent a link out for a video chat earlier, and I'll be doing that again very, very soon. Alright, love you guys. Miss you. Night.